My face in the foliage, you've seen that face before. Carved in the choir by your fathers in days of yore. I'm the power in the pulse, I'm the song underneath the soil. I'm the unseen king of the ditches, ragged and royal. I'm the green man, don't take my name in vain. I'm the green man, feel like break my chain. Leave you cut me down, I'll spring back green again. I'm the roots on the stalker, tender shoots on the vine. I'm the goodness in the bread, I'm the white.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our annual Linlathen event. My name is Pastor Matt Dick. I'm the minister here at Hillside Church, and we've had the privilege to host the Linlathen now for, I think, the last 5 years. 5 years now, and we are greatly blessed. I've been minister here for 20 years and known Kirstin for longer than that. But yeah, it's great to have you folks out here to historic Elmont. And if you're from the neighborhood, welcome. If you've driven out, welcome as well. We're glad to make that you made the trip, and we're just thrilled that we can have Malcolm here. And I'm going to let Kirstin go ahead and do some more introductions. So good to have you all here.
Thank you, Matt. It's wonderful to see familiar faces and new faces. And even as I look around, I see faces that I haven't seen for too long. I see faces that I certainly didn't expect to see that I last saw in Oxford, yeah. And I know amongst you there are neighbors and friends and family, and welcome. Welcome to this evening to celebrate together, to have fun together, to laugh together, to listen together, possibly to shed a tear or two together as we listen to Malcolm. I'm going to keep my introduction of Malcolm fairly short because Malcolm is wonderful at sharing himself with the people before him as he shares his poetry and his song. It is our 6th year of hosting the Linlathen Conference or Retreat, which just is a very small gathering for a long weekend to gather and discuss faith and the arts. We alternate between a conference, which is generally open to the public, or like this year, a retreat, which is aimed specifically at professionals in the field of the particular theme. So this year we had a group of professors and writers who are working and interested in the poetic imagination and faith and imagination. What is that? And especially in the vein and genre of the Inklings. What were they doing? Why? Is that happening today? How should it be? And usually we have our speaker give his public lecture or his or her public performance before the conference when they're fresh and ready to go. Malcolm is graciously sharing himself with us at the end of the conference. So he has had a full-on 3 days, as has the team at the back who's helped make this happen. Each year is different. Trevor Hart spoke on imagination in the arts. Cheryl Bear is an Indigenous musician who came and gave us an evening of story and song. Bruce Kuhn, a Broadway actor, came one year and performed some Tolstoy short stories. So we have quite a variety of events that happen, but it happens once a year. Hillside hosts us here. I think it's harder to come up with a better introduction to Malcolm than the quotation that probably most of you have read at this point in time. And that is, what would happen if John Donne or George Herbert journeyed to Middle-earth by way of San Francisco, took musical cues from Jerry Garcia and fashion tips from Bilbo Baggins, and rode back in a Harley? It's a wonderful description of the beautiful person who is Malcolm Guite. Malcolm and I have engaged with each other and interacted with each other for almost 20 years now, which is hard to believe. We share a position together on the George MacDonald Society board. So we overlap at conferences, and we've had rush meetings in pubs at train stations, and it's been delightful to have Malcolm here in the Valley. Those of you who have been to Linlathen before know that that's a very central part to what Linlathen is, that it's something that happens here in the Ottawa Valley. A place that has formed and shaped me, formed and shaped many of you, not all of you, but many of you are Valley born and bred. And Malcolm is not Valley born and bred, but he has an important part of him that is shaped in Hamilton. And for many years, his father was actually Professor McMaster. And so Malcolm's been talking over this weekend and even on the way here, just how different memories from his teen years of Ontario keep coming back to him, whether it's Tim Hortons or, yeah, maybe we'll just leave it at Tim Hortons. So Malcolm, welcome back to Ontario. Thank you for being here, and we look forward to being delighted with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for those kind words. I blush. And thanks, Matt and Hillside, for welcoming me here. He just told me as I was out there that the Scots who came here and founded this church were Covenanters. And I thought, because part of my family heritage and stories coming down, my mother is Scots, so I'm half Scots, and is that there was a whole Covenanter strand. And in fact, I am a direct descendant of John Nesbitt, who was one of the martyrs, who was martyred at Kilmarnock. And, you know, my mother can remember being taken to the spot. So there's that strand to my story as well. So I'm really delighted to be here, and I'm going to be sharing with you some songs and some poems. Actually, it was the Canadian singer-songwriter Steve Bell who first showed me that we could do songs and poems together. And think of it like this. If you're thinking, oh no, poetry, what's going to happen here? You know, at least there'll be a song occasionally. And once you've heard me playing and singing, you'll go, oh, well, at least there's some poetry coming, you know. Yeah. So you know, we'll sort of we'll get by both ways. I'm going to start with a poem, which is the title poem of one of my books called The Singing Bowl, just as a stilling kind of beginning. It happens to be a poem which begins with the word beginning, or begins with the word begin. I'm not going to go into a Julie Andrews thing there, but it's begin. And it talks about a song, and yet it's a poem, so it seems like a good one to start with. It's called a Singing Bowl. I don't know if you know about singing bowls. They're these wonderful Tibetan things. They're sort of a brass bowl, but they're extraordinarily resonant. So you don't actually even need to strike them. You just kind of trail this beater, like running your finger around the top of a wine glass, and the whole thing just trembles into sound and has extraordinary tones and overtones. This poem's called Singing Bowl. Begin the song exactly where you are. Remain within the world of which you're made. Call nothing common in the earth or air. Accept it all, and let it be for good. Start with the very breath you breathe in now. This moment's pulse, this rhythm in your blood, and listen to it, ringing soft and low. Stay with the music. Words will come in time. Slow down your breathing. Keep it deep and slow. Become an open singing bowl whose chime is richness rising out of emptiness, and timelessness resounding into time. And when the heart is full of quietness, begin the song exactly where you are. So when I wrote that poem, how it started, I was really stressed out and, doing too much stuff and, filling my days up and just realizing I was kind of overheating and overcooking the brain. So I thought, I know what I'll do. I'll ring that singing bowl that we bought sometime and, I'll chill out and, And unfortunately, the singing bowl, which used to be kind of near my hut where I wrote poetry, had somehow got moved around, and it was right near our front door. And I went to run the beater around the singing bowl. It went, I thought, what is this? And then I realized the singing bowl was full of junk and stuff because it was near the door. Like everybody's putting their keys and their gloves and the singing bowl was just, so I thought, oh, I better empty the singing bowl. So I'm kind of taking the stuff out of the singing bowl and because it won't sing unless I empty it. And I'm going, oh, wait a minute. Anyway, the funny thing was that this, it's traditional particularly an epic poem for the poet to begin with an invocation of the muse. Milton, beginning of Paradise Lost, says, sing, heavenly muse. Except the poor old heavenly muse has to wait for a bit. Have any of you ever had a look at Paradise Lost? I mean, how Paradise Lost begins, it begins with the most massive plot spoiler ever. Obviously, Paradise Lost begins of man's first disobedience and the fruit of that forbidden tree whose mortal taste brought death into the world and all our woe, with loss of Eden, till one greater men restore us and regain the blissful seat. Sing, heavenly muse. You have to wait that long for the verb, And you can imagine Milton's muse going like, I thought you'd never ask, But so normally you invoke the muse, right? And you ask the muse to sing the song for you. That's what Virgil does, Homer does it, Milton does it. But, times have changed. And, a good muse is hard to find. But, I mean, a modern man doesn't snap his fingers and tell the muse what to do. He waits patiently until she tells him what to do. And so this was the muse to me. Begin the song exactly where you are, remain within the world of which you're made. And I thought it was going to be advice about poetry, and it was advice about poetry. Halfway through the muse telling me, I realized it was advice about prayer as well. About how to pray, about how to be in the place and let God be here and not rush out of his world or deny his world until he'd shown me again, as he does on every Sabbath when he looks at it and says, behold, it is very good. So that was a bit of a clue for me generally that poetry and prayer, which used to be in different parts of my life, have come more and more and more together. And there's a beautiful poem by the great Irish poet Seamus Heaney, where he remembers having gone to a priest for counsel and advice and having made confession, and how in the advice after Heaney's confession, the priest says to him, read poems as prayers. And that's become a kind of quite significant part of, I guess, of who I am and what I do. There's quite a few poems in this particular book, The Singing Bowl, which are, I guess, in different ways about the whole business of writing poetry. And some of them are more sort of serious than others. I know there are some writers here. So I'm just going to read you a lighter poem. It's a villanelle. I've got several villanelles. And it's about that struggle when you think, like, is this even any good? Like, why should I bother with this? So the great thing, if you're a writer and you're stuck, is that the villanelle is one of those patterns with a repeated line. Like, there's two lines that come in the first verse, and they keep interweaving, and each verse ends with another, alternating, and then they come back together at the end. So it's a bit like a knitting pattern, really. It's kind of knit one, purl one, you just do it. And the great thing about a villanelle is that you only need two good lines, and the rest is, you've got a poem, I'm going to read you a couple of villanelles. You all know a villanelle, even though you both don't know that you know a villanelle, because most people know or have heard somehow, somewhere, that great poem of Dylan Thomas's about the death of his father. Do not go gentle into that good night. Old men should burn and rage at close of day. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. All this, and the way those two lines keep going. You, my father, there on that sad height, bless, curse me with your fierce tears, I pray. Do not go gentle into that good night. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. So that's a villanelle. But here's a more light-hearted villanelle, and it's called Salvage. And this is for anyone who's had a go at writing a poem and thought, like, why do I even bother? Which, I often think. So, Salvage. Perhaps this poem's just another write-off. Another scrap of paper for the bin. So, should I struggle on or turn the light off? My muse, maybe, has booked another night off. Without her help, I can't even begin. Perhaps this poem's just another write-off. And yet, I can't forget what I caught sight of. A grace I mustn't lose and cannot win. So, should I struggle on or turn the light off? I'm darkened by the love I most make light of. I cast aside what's not yet counted in. Could I presume to recognize a write-off? It is despair itself that I must fight off when giving up feels just like giving in. So, should I struggle on or turn the light off? There's something here to salvage. Something right off life's radar, or else underneath her skin. Since I'm redeemed, and I was once a write-off, I'll struggle on until they turn the light off. So there's a little bit of hope for you guys if you're writing. So since I said begin the song exactly where you are, I figure I should maybe do a song as well, or two. Thanks to the guys on the amazing Linlathen team who kind of sourcing me guitars and stuff like that. We've had an amazing time. Kirstin's been very self-deprecating, but she's an extraordinary woman and an extraordinary community builder and an amazing hostess of all of us, a great maker of hospitality. She makes hospitality in the way that, poets make poems. So I want to sing a song which is a celebration of hospitality, and it's called Angels Unawares, and it's a riff on that great phrase in Hebrews 13, practice hospitality, for by so doing some have entertained angels unawares. And I love the story in Genesis to which the author of Hebrews is alluding, how Abraham and Sarai are there by the oaks at Mamre, and how the three strangers come and they've hardly got anything but they're hospitable. So anyway, this is called Angels Unawares. Some people say that life is just a given thing, but you and I both know by whom it's lent, and it's right here in the dirt where we've all been loved and heard, that love himself has come to pitch his tent. Sometimes we're in the fields of holy roses, other times we're rolling in the tares, but breaking bread, sharing wine, did I feel your hand touch mine? Or did we both touch angels unawares? Abraham is down by the oaks at Mamre, and Joseph dreams beside an empty barn. And there's a woman by the well with dreams no man can tell, though a broken man might keep her safe from harm. There's somebody else inside my fiery furnace, and Jacob is gazing up those endless stairs. We are all wounded on this road, but we share each other's load, and we make each other angels unawares. Everybody backs into the future. Everyone is just feeling for it blind. And sometimes we get lost, all the threads of our lives get crossed, but I'm sure glad yours got tangled up with mine. Day is gone, I know I should be going. There's barely light enough to say our prayers. Ah, but give me leave the while for to turn and see you smile, and leave to love like angels unawares. Leave to love like angels unawares. So, because I wrote that that poem, The Singing Bowl, about being really still and centered and all that stuff, people think, because they read the poem, and apparently there's a shop in Cambridge which sells singing bowls and stuff, and I went in there one time, and they had the poem written up above the singing bowl. So it's really bizarre. But so people assume that I must have some kind of constant Zen-like calm. Obviously, you now know I don't. But and of course, the opposite is the case. I write that poem not because I have it, but because I need it. Because the poem is always... And this is true of the song I'm going to sing you now, which is called Lente, Lente. So lente, lente means, slowly, gently, carefully, with presence, And a friend of mine... so I wrote this song partly for a friend of mine who has a little business making felt. And she creates these felts, laying down layer after layer. And her felt company is called Lente. And she kind of, makes these beautiful felts. And she makes like felt hats and stuff like that. But she layers these felts in the winter. So I wrote this poem called Lente. This song called Lente, Lente. And again, it's one of those things where people think, oh, wow, he's really calm. But the song is, again, addressed, to me. And in fact, a lot of it is voicing what this particular friend of mine said to me when she realized I was kind of running hot, and she was kind of calming me down. It's like, do nothing, Malcolm. And I said, oh, there's a song in there. I must go away and write it, I just suddenly thought I'd like to play this partly because I've had a lovely time at Linlathen, and amazingly, they actually assigned a bright student to me to be my sort of, teaching assistant and stuff like that, called Maya, who's here, who did a fabulous job. She told me she's been working on the Book of Kells. And looking at the Book of Kells and thinking about visual art, and has had a year in TCD in Trinity College Dublin. And it so happens that this song mentions the Book of Kells, so I'm gonna play this one for her by way of thank you. But maybe there's a few of you who need this same advice in the same way that I do. So lente, lente. I've been running from the past, and I've been living way too fast, but I'm a-coming home at last, home to take it slow and gently. Lente, 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 lente. She says, slow down, petal, take it gently. Lente, 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 lente. Let's take time to gather wool, gently tease and softly pull. When the harvest moon is full and the felts are forming gently. Lente, 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 lente. Close your eyes, count to 20. Lente, lente, let me gaze on you intently. Lente, 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 lente. just don't do so much on the run. Step aside, let's have some fun. 'Cause here's a friendship just begun. We're gonna take it slow and gently. Lente, 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 lente. Slow down, flower. Take it gently. Lente, 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 lente. Empty shells. My heart lies open like the book of Kells. But I'll draw sweet water from deep wells when I learn to take it gently. Lente, 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 lente. Slow down, learn to gaze on life. Learn to gaze on life intently. Lente, lente, lente. 'Cause all those guys who set the pace just disappear without a trace. We'll taste a different kind of grace when we learn to take it gently. Lente, 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 lente. Slow down, flower, let me gaze on you intently. Lente, lente, close your eyes and count to 20. Lente, 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 lente. So in a way, you could argue that poetry itself is a kind of slowed down language. That it's the opposite of skimming and speed reading and skipping along the surface, that it's kind of allowing you to get into it. There's all kinds of ways of thinking about what poetry is. And I might just read you kind of one or two that, I wonder if I put did I ever put my cheese poem in here? One or two different ways of thinking about how poetry works. And I'll read one or two poems about that for you. But before I do that, in case people are going like, oh, I usually come to this thing and it's okay, but oh dear, poetry. It's like we have a thing called the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Do you know if you have that? Yeah. So like vogue on poetry. I mean, it can be very effective, for clearing a room, or even just getting you through. I travel and talk about poetry quite a lot, and there's a fabulous poem by Seamus Heaney called The Rain Stick. And to really get that poem, you actually need a rain stick, which is this beautiful thing that looks like a dry cactus stalk, and you turn it upside down. And as Heaney says, what happens next is a music you never would have known to listen for in a cactus stalk. Downpour, sluice rush, spillage, and backwash come flowing. It's a great poem. So I kind of travel sometimes, or I used to travel with a rain stick, right? But I began to find in these difficult times of security and, terrorism, and I am a dangerous bearded cleric, and I was born in Nigeria and all this stuff. So I just began getting a lot of stress, And I had this guy one time saying to me, like, well, what is this rain stick? And I said, no, it's a musical instrument. He said, he was obviously afraid I was going to use it as a weapon, on the plane. So I said, it's a musical instrument. He said, well, why are you traveling? I said, well, it's actually to illustrate a poem, He said, well, how do I know that? I said, it goes like this. I pen the rain stick, and what happens next is a music that you never would have. And he says, that's fine. I said, I'm not finished. Never would have known to listen for in a cactus. It's okay. And they rushed me through. I went right through security. And
It amazes me to think of the number of times that I've actually made it across borders while still in possession of mind-expanding poetry, which nobody knew about. But just in case there's anybody around who's thinking, oh God, vogue on poetry. So let me just say, in my experience, when you really get to poetry and you love it, it's a lovely thing, it's a natural thing. But a lot of people, particularly guys, I think, seem to be kind of locked out of it. And I've come to the realization that it's actually usually because of a bad English teacher. It's usually because of some teacher that you did poetry with. The kind of teacher, I don't know if you know, there's a great Texas poet, contemporary Texas poet called Billy Collins. And he's got a poem about like that bad English teacher. And he says, she was the kind of teacher whose idea of how to do it was like, she would tie the poem to a chair and beat it with a hosepipe till it confessed what it meant. Whereas he says, I just wanted to step down into the canoe of the poem and drift off and see where it took me. I wanted to put my ear to the murmuring hive of the poem and hear the music of the innumerable bees and wonder what honey they were making for me. But teacher had a different idea. So sometimes when I'm doing an evening about poetry, I feel that it might be best to start the evening, I failed to do it this evening, to start the evening by performing a minor exorcism and going like, if the lingering shade, the half-remembered ghost of that English teacher who made you feel inadequate and turned poetry into a problem, rather than a beautiful invitation, if the ghost of that English teacher is lingering somehow on the margin of your mind, causing some unrest, can I just say now, because I am a priest in the Church of England, and I am in fact my bishop's advisor on deliverance ministry, so can I just say, depart now, go to the place prepared for you and never return. So that's cool, that's that bad English teacher in detention now, and it's playtime. So all the poems we're going to do, enjoy the poems, enjoy them, and don't, and if it's a good line and you enjoy it, let it, stay with it, roll with it. If not, don't worry, there's a song coming soon. So, I want to, if poetry is the opposite of speed reading, then, and if it's about concentration rather than distraction, then we need it even more, because we've got all these devices whose whole purpose is to spread us out thin rather than allow us to be personally present. I had actually met online quite a few of the professors and writers that we gathered with at Linlathen, but are not in person. And it made all the difference in the world that we were in person. So our devices, and I use devices, and I've got a blog and all that stuff, kind of need handling and measuring. So when I got an iPhone eventually, and I was persuaded, and I noticed this whole Apple thing, they have like a little eye, don't they? And it's like iPhone, iPad, whatever. God knows what I'll come up with next, but anyway, I love, when the iPad first came out, there was a wonderful sketch, I don't know if you saw it, where, because it was a generational thing and the younger generation had it, where the girl has given her dad, who's a bit of a home chef, an iPad for Christmas, and they're in the kitchen, preparing the meal after, and he's like chopping the onions and scraping them into the thing, and she's saying, hey, Dad, did you like the iPad I gave you? And he says, yeah, it's great, rinsing it under the tap and chopping some more onions on it. But anyway, when I got an iPhone, I decided I needed to write a poem to my iPhone, because I'm sad that way. And this is called I Ode, right? So it's a little I, big O, I Ode. And I'm addressing my phone. My private portal to a world between, my placeless place of virtual exchange. I see through you, though you remain unseen, and make familiar what you once made strange. You make a stranger means to make me friend, whom I can touch, to like, to show I care. You make a means to every unknown end. You make one little screen, and everywhere. I am familiar with 100 faces, all famished for their 15 minutes fame. I am half present in 100 places, but never present in the place I am. I pull you from my pocket when you call. I touch and swipe as I am bid to do. You do my bidding too. You do it all. What will you make of me, or I of you? Open question. I don't know the answer, but maybe I'll move. Poetry is quite good for asking open questions. People sometimes ask me, like, how does a poem start, and where do you get the inspiration from, and stuff like that. And if I knew, I'd bottle it. But for me, this is true of a lot of songwriters as well. It's often a phrase that somebody else comes up with, that you overhear in conversation, or you hear it on the radio, and suddenly it strikes you in a new or a fresh way. So you kind of play with it a little bit. And I remember some time ago listening to a really irritating arts program on the radio with one of these artists, who are in the kind of the realm of art where it's about shock. It's about, it requires an outraged response for it even to become the art that it is. And, of course, last year's outrage, is this year's dull convention. So you're constantly... And then this particular artist, I won't say who he was. I'm not sure I can even remember, but I'm sure it involved dismembering lots of things. Anyway, the art. So the interviewer was being extraordinarily sycophantic, because this was like the it guy, the buzz artist. And he says, you're just really so completely on the frontiers. You're at the cutting edge of modern art. And the guy said, he didn't say, oh, no, that's fine. He said, yes, indeed. I like to think of myself and my exploratory, boundary-pushing, transgressive art as being right. I am indeed right on the cutting edge. And I just thought, ouch. That's like the last thing I want to be is astride a cutting edge, And then the cutting edge just made me think about the whole idea of the kind of, well, obviously it made me think of a great line of Milton's about slitting and cutting, which is when his friend who wanted to be a poet, Edward King, dies, and Milton writes Lycidas. And he says, just when we think to burst out in a sudden blaze, comes the blind fury with the abhorred shears and slits the thin-spun life. So I thought about that. And then also, obviously, anything to do with shears and edges and cutting and clipping is inimical to me. If there's anything that involves trimming, I stay away from that. But I then also thought about how actually cutting in the sense of the cutting room floor and deleting, there's a fundamental problem at work here. There's an issue in our age about this. So out of all of this came this poem, which is called The Cutting Edge. Oh, the other thing that I guess some of you might know, and I just love it, it's Andrew Marvell, Ode to His Coy Mistress, which is, the one that famously begins, had we but willed enough and time, this coyness lady were no crime. And it's a lovely poem in which he says, I would like to take a century to praise your eyebrows, but hey, the last bus goes at 11, and except he puts it much more beautifully. He says, but at my back I always hear time's winged chariot hurrying near. And that kind of came into this. So this is called The Cutting Edge. At my back, like you, I always hear the edge. The cutting edge is coming near. Not the blind fury with the abhorred shears, but this is what I fear. The stealthy scissors of a blinded time, cutting through accretions of the past, dully and daily deleting whatever is not next, sneering and sniping and snipping, excising every signpost from the text, paring all the parts that point away to something other than our circled self. I know the angels were the first to fall. Cherub and seraph spiraled down in circling curlicues of sacred text, flaring in ink and paper to the floor, the shredded evidence of our affair, our old, embarrassing affair with God. And God himself will follow soon enough. A little word, so easy to excise, another snippet for the cutting room, a sweeping on the heap of history. But still, at night, I tiptoe to the door to rustle through these severed strips of love and strew my heart with scraps of poetry, forbidden hopes and shards of mystery. They rustle through me in my waking dreams, so I'll have a heart, a head, a handful when the scissors come for me. For at my back, like you, I always hear the cutting edge. The edge is coming near. So, just thought I'd cheer you up, you know. So that's, I guess, a kind of protest poem. I'm standing here at a lectern. I thought like I would be in some small kind of lectern off the side. So I feel kind of slightly in awe of where I'm standing, and obviously far better and worthier and more weighty things are said here. And of course, what is read here, I expect, is the sacred text itself. Two of my books of poetry are really poetic responses to the scripture and to the story of salvation. Sounding the Seasons go through all the seasons of the story of our salvation, and my book, Parable and Paradox, contains 50 sonnets on the sayings of Christ. But in my book, Sounding the Seasons, I have 4 sonnets for each of the 4 evangelists, celebrating each of them under their traditional symbols. But before I put the evangelist sonnets, I actually wanted to write something about the lectern itself, this lectern. The lectern in the church that I was writing these poems for is St. Edward King and Martyr. It's got some very beautiful old things. It's a church that goes in its current stone structure back to the 13th century, but there was an Anglo-Saxon church there before. It's an ancient place. But our lectern is very plain. It's a very old, plain piece of oak. And as I was one of the clergy at the church, well, from where I was sitting, I was behind the person reading at the lectern. And you'd see people coming up and read the scriptures. And there was one man, a wonderful elderly man, who loved to read the scriptures. And particularly we read from the authorized version, from the King James Version. And we had a very beautiful old copy of it. And 2 or 3 of the translators of that had been members of our church and on the clergy of it. So, you know, it was a bit of a thing for us. But this guy loved it, and he loved to declaim it. And one day he was walking up, and preparing to read one of the great passages, one of the great seasonal passages. It might even have been the very passage I expounded with you, the beginning of John's Gospel. And just as he was about to read, I just noticed that his hands were trembling. And they were just trembling with the sense of awe at what he was doing. So I put that into a poem called The Lectern. Here it is. It seems good to read it in the lectern of a church that's also got this history and connection. So, the lectern. Some rise on eagle's wings. This one is plain. Plain English workmanship in solid oak. Age gracefully, it says. Go with the grain. You walk towards an always open book. Open as every life to every light. Open to shade and shadow, day and night. The changeless witness of your changing pain. Be still, the lectern says. stand here and read. Here are your mysteries, your love and fear, and running through them all, the slender thread of God's strange grace, red as these ribbons, red as your own blood when reading reads you here and pierces joint and marrow. So you stand, the lectern still beneath your trembling hand. So that prefaces the sonnets on the four Gospels, and I'll read you more than one of the four Gospels. I used to sometimes, you're not supposed to have a favorite Gospel, are you? Because it's like not having favorite children, you know. But sometimes, a bit like your children, sometimes you can understand one of them better than the other, you know. I'll read you two. So I do Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and I do them, you know, the vision of the four creatures, you know, in Daniel and then again in the book of Revelation, became very early in the church's life a symbol of the four Gospels, the four living creatures around the throne, because they're around the throne, they're alive, and they're lifting up on the throne Jesus Christ. That's what they're there for. And they're kind of alive. And very early on, the church began to think about those eagles, the lion and those creatures, the lion and the eagle and the ox and the man or angel, and kind of see how the different takes of the Gospels worked with that. So they realized that Matthew was the man because Matthew starts with that very human genealogy of Jesus and is really locating Jesus in his immediately human and Jewish context, and that Mark is the lion, of course, because Mark is always pouncing on you, isn't he? Mark doesn't go, now we're going to have a long, clear narrative and I'm going to let you. Mark's favorite word, his most frequently used adjective, is immediately. And immediately he was healed, and immediately he did this, and it's kind of extraordinary, you know. And then Luke is the gospel who really understands the outcast and the lowly and the servant and the person on the margin, you know, the lowly ox that treads the corn. John is the eagle. Of course, John is the eagle, because in the ancient world it was believed that the eagle was the one creature that could look directly into the light of the sun and not be blinded. And that John, in his prologue, looks directly and unmediatedly at God. But also, as St. Augustine says about John, the eagle is high looking up at the sun, but then it comes plummeting down at high speed upon the body, as it were. And so John's gospel, in the beginning was the Word, and all the way up there, and then wham, Word was made flesh. The height leads to this great descent. So they had that figured out. And the point was, I mean, you might say, you know, they were pushing it a bit, but the point was that these were alive. And they were each necessary, and there were four of them, and they were around the throne. So anyway, I'll just read you Luke and John. Luke. His gospel is itself a living creature, a ground and glory round the throne of God, where earth and heaven breathe through human nature, and one upon the throne sees it is good. Luke is the living pillar of our healing, the lowly ox, the servant of the four. We turn his page to find his face revealing the wonder and the welcome of the poor. He breathes good news to all who bear a burden, good news to all who turn and try again. The meek rejoice and prodigals find pardon. A lost thief reaches paradise through pain. The voiceless find their voice in every word, and with Our Lady magnify our Lord. And as you see, I'm kind of riffing on the bits we get in Luke and nowhere else. Like, can you imagine not having the story of the prodigal son? Or not having the Magnificat? Or not knowing that he could say to a thief beside him, Tonight you'll be with me in paradise. Think just for a minute about the extraordinary transformation and comfort, especially to people feeling wretched and oppressed and at their last tether, that just those things have ministered. So thank you, Luke. Okay, now John, I have to confess, I've got a bit of a... John is my favorite, to be honest. I mean, I'm a John gospel guy. I mean, I love the others, and it's really important, but there's something about John that reaches me again and again. I have a strong, talking about the Scots and, I have a strong affinity, well, for Mungo, for Kentigern, the patron of Glasgow, but also for Cuthbert, who started at Melrose Abbey. When Aidan died at Lindisfarne, Cuthbert saw a vision of Aidan and was called from being a shepherd boy and went to the Abbey at Melrose, and then eventually was sent himself to Lindisfarne. And I've walked from Lindisfarne to Melrose Abbey reading Cuthbert. But Cuthbert, like Bede, at the end of his life, all he wanted, he didn't want food or drink or anything, he just wanted John's gospel. That's all he needed. He just sort of breakfast on the Psalms, and then he basically had the monks read him John's gospel, and he read John's gospel with them, and they just opened it up. So here's John. John, this is the gospel of the primal light, the first beginning and the fruitful end, the soaring glory of an eagle's flight, the quiet touch of a beloved friend. This is the gospel of our transformation, water to wine and grain to living bread, blindness to sight and sorrow to elation, and Lazarus himself back from the dead. This is the gospel of all inner meaning, the heart of heaven opened to the earth, a gentle friend on Jesus' bosom leaning, and Nicodemus offered a new birth. No need to search the heavens high above. Come close with John and feel the pulse of love. We were talking today at Linlathen about the great George MacDonald, and George MacDonald produced a fabulous book, which is now almost hardly ever remembered, did a great deal of good in its day, called England's Antiphon. And an antiphon, as you know, is if the thing is sung antiphonally, it's like got two sides and it's people facing each other. And an antiphon is sung on either side of something. So we sing an antiphon on either side of the Magnificat of Mary's great revolutionary song of praise. And MacDonald felt that poetry itself is antiphonal. That when somebody chants a poem to you, first of all, you yourself are making the poem, right? If anything in my poetry has meant anything to you so far, they're just words, they're just sounds, they're just something you could get on an oscilloscope, they're just shapes on a piece of paper. If there was poetry here, then it's your poetry. You've taken those basic ingredients that I'm scattering out in a particular, and you've turned them by your poetic imagination into whatever it is you saw. It's an antiphonal thing, we're doing it together. And often one poem kind of invokes another. So this book, which was my first sort of properly published book of poetry, as opposed to, little chapbooks, began as a set of poems with a set of poems called the Great O Antiphons. And the Great O Antiphons are the prayers made probably in the 6th century by an anonymous Christian writer, they're a work of genius. So they're called O antiphons because they're quite literally all begin with the word O, and they're invocations of Christ. And they basically, every one of them says, "Oh Jesus, come." That's plot summary of all 7. Except in a stroke of unbelievable genius and kind of the ultimate expression of less is more. Even though they were written 600 AD, the genius who wrote these 7 short little Latin prayers realized that really to call for Jesus to come think of his coming at Christmas and thinking of his coming at the end of all time, is to be for a minute, especially if you think of his coming at Christmas, and these are done in Advent in the lead up to Christmas, is to remember what it was like to be BC. There's a BC time, is there not, in all of our lives, however happily AD we are now. There's a time when, even if we might have heard somebody use the name in a swear word, we never really knew the name. But we kind of knew what we wanted, or we knew that we still hadn't found what we were looking for. And what the author of these prayers did was to go back and especially look in the prophecies and in Isaiah and see what it was people needed to come. And they saw there was a great cry that the wisdom, the sapientia, as they called it in Latin, the wisdom that had ordered all things and had been lost in our fall could come and show us the right way again, come and teach us. Oh, wisdom, come. And that there was, we are the people who walk about in darkness, and the people who walk in darkness need to see a marvelous light. Oh, light, oh, Orients, come. And we've somehow kind of imprisoned ourselves in our own intricate mazes, and we're stuck and we're lost, and we need a key to open again. And we need a key also to close finally for us those obsessive, dark, repetitive dungeons that we get ourselves into. Oh, clavis, oh, key, come. So 7 great titles of Christ, but not the name of Jesus. This guy actually calls for Jesus to come 7 times, but because he hasn't yet come in the prayer, he says, oh light, oh key, oh king, oh stone. He just calls him. And every one of those tells you something about who Jesus is and why you want him to come. So I sometimes ask people in my own church in Advent to give this, they say, well, you give up stuff for Lent, what do I give up for Advent? And don't get me wrong, it would be terrible if they rushed out and said, our terrible heretical apostate pastor told us to give up the name of Jesus for Advent. I'm not saying that. I'm saying abstain for a minute and ask yourself who he really is and what it is you really want to come. So I wrote these Advent antiphons, and I'm just going to read 3 of them to you. The first one is O Sapientia, O Wisdom. I cannot think unless I have been thought, nor can I speak unless I have been spoken. I cannot teach except as I am taught, or break the bread except as I am broken. O mind behind the mind through which I seek. O light within the light by which I see. O word beneath the words with which I speak. O founding unfound wisdom finding me. O sounding song whose depth is sounding me. O memory of time reminding me, my ground of being always grounding me. My maker's bounding line defining me. Come, hidden wisdom. Come with all you bring. Come to me now, disguised as everything. And this one is O Radix. One of my favorite of them is O Root. O Root of Jesse. By the way, if you think you didn't know about the Advent antiphons, you do, as long as you've ever sung O Come, Emmanuel. If you've sung that, then 5 of the 7 antiphons are right there in the verses, and you've been singing them. So, O come thou, root. So, O Radix, O root, the root of Jesse. Now, there's a very particular meaning in Isaiah there, which is to do with the lineage of Jesse and David and Obed, and, I'm not denying any of that, okay? But I am saying there's something particularly appealing in our time at understanding Christ as root. And it's certainly a meaning that Paul picks up in Ephesians when he says that he prays that you, being rooted and grounded in love, may have power to comprehend with all the saints what is the length and breadth. And we are in such a rootless time, and such a rootless age, everything is shifting. And so I wrote this poem to Christ, asking him to root us in again. And, well, you see what we make of it. O Radix. In fact, it's going to lead into a song, so just in case you're thinking, come on, song, no poems. Right, so, okay, O Radix. All of us sprung from one deep hidden seed, rose from a root invisible to all. We knew the virtues once of every weed, but severed from the roots of ritual, we surf the surface of a widescreen world and find no virtue in the virtual. We shrivel on the edges of a wood whose heart we once inhabited in love. Now we have need of you, forgotten root, the stock and stem of every living thing, whom once we worshipped in the sacred grove. For now is winter, now is withering, unless we let you root us deep within, under the ground of being. Graft us in. And of course, that kind of grafted in thing, you know, Paul does fabulous things with that, doesn't he? So I'm going to do a song in a sec that comes off of that, but I said I'd do 3 of these, and I'd quite like to do the final one, which, of course, I say he doesn't use the name of Jesus, but, of course, the 6 antiphons keep going. By the way, these antiphons were sung, okay? They were sung on the 7 days leading up to Christmas Eve, right? Antiphonally on either side of Mary's great song, the Magnificat, right? And they were in Latin, okay? So there was a big O, and then whatever it was. So the first one is O Sapientia, then it's O Adonai, O Lord, O Radix, O Root, O Clavis, O Key, O Oriens, Dayspring Light, O Rex Gentium, King of the Nations. And then finally he lets himself have a name. O Emmanuel, God with us, come. It's the one I'm going to read you now. But just a kind of cool medieval geeky thing. If you happen to have if you were a monk, you know, had your psalter and you were like singing this out and it was all written up with the big O's, the Rex Gentium and the Emmanuel would all be capitals illuminated. And you just think this is random titles, you know, but when you got to Christmas Eve, right, and you're singing O Emmanuel, if you looked back at those capital letters and read them in the light of what's going to happen, looking backwards, and often that's the only way we can read Providence, isn't it? And the promises, we see it afterwards. You would see E for Emmanuel, R for Rex Gentium, O for Oriens, C for Clavis, R for Radix, A for Adonai, S for Sapientia. And that would spell Ero Cras, tomorrow I come. Cras is like procrastinate, putting off to tomorrow. So Ero Cras, I'll be there, I'll be with you tomorrow. It's wonderful, the kind of answer as well. Anyway, here's O Emmanuel, and I'm riffing on the hymn and gathering all these images together. O Emmanuel, O come and be our God with us. O long sought withness for a world without. O secret seed, O hidden spring of light, come to us, wisdom. Come, unspoken name. Come, root and key and king and holy flame. O quickened little wick, so tightly curled. Be folded with us into time and place. Unfold for us the mystery of grace and make a womb of all this wounded world. O heart of heaven beating in the earth. O tiny hope within our hopelessness, come to be born, to bear us to our birth, to touch a dying world with new-made hands, and make these rags of time our swaddling bands. So a sort of promise of... I wonder what I did with my pick. Thanks. So in that O Radix, you know, the stock and stem of every living thing. That notion of Christ as the root. That became quite a sort of thing for me in various ways. And I was once walking along the lovely Grantchester Meadows, title of a Pink Floyd album, but also a place, and between Cambridge, where I lived, and the village of Grantchester, there's wonderful hedgerows along there. And my friend and I, who were walking along, were thinking, like, we were speculating, playing with William Blake's wonderful anthem that we all sing in England, and did those feet in ancient time walk upon England's mountains green, and was the holy Lamb of God on England's pleasant pastures seen. And we're going like, well, so like, what if the countenance divine did shine upon our clouded hills? Not that we think, I think historically very unlikely, but though, there are quite a few years not accounted for, I mean, Blake thought that Joseph of Arimathea was probably a Phoenician tin trader, and there was a trade between Palestine and Cornwall, and, the Arthurian legends say that, Joseph of Arimathea was his uncle. Anyway, we won't go there. But we were saying, like, supposing just the mature Jesus, been talking about, and just as when he's walking around, he's saying these great I am sayings, like, I am the vine, and you are the branches, he's kind of drawing from what's around him. So we were wondering what if the I am sayings would have been different if like he'd been with us in this. So I don't know, just out of nowhere, I just said, I think he might say, I am the green man. Not the pub necessarily, although in fact we were going to a pub called the Green Man in Grantchester. But that sense, that what they call, I don't know if you know about the Green Man, these kind of foliate heads, these very beautiful carvings with a face, a kind of often quite a wild face, which seems to be speaking greenness and growth into being, and out of whose mouth these vines are proceeding. And, it's been picked up a lot on. The only place we find these, let me just say, is in churches and cathedrals. They're carved on the roof bosses, they're sometimes on the lintels of the doors. They're beautiful pieces of carving, and but there's a thing happening, where in kind of various internet sites and the whole kind of, new agey, neo-pagan thing, there are lots of important things going on there, but they're saying, this is a great pagan thing, and we're going to have this pagan thing instead of Christianity, right? And I'm going, well, wait a minute, like, why do you think the Christians carved this? And one of the things we love about C.S. Lewis is his recognition that there was a kind of, and indeed St. Paul is the same, in Athens, when he says, I saw this statue to an unknown God, he whom you worship as unknown, him therefore I preach. But obviously there's much that needs to be judged and set aside, but there is also something everywhere in all these, particularly the celebrations of the goodness of God's creation, and the springing green grass and the corn, and the way the grain of wheat falls into the ground and dies and yet comes up, and the songs about John Barleycorn. All of that is rustling with the rumor of the death and resurrection of Jesus. All of it is pointing. And just as he says to the woman, a greater than Solomon is here, so a greater than Pan is here. A greater than Apollo is here, but not a lesser than Apollo. So everything you've ever loved about Pan or Apollo that is great and good and worthy of inclusion in the joys of heaven is there in Jesus, There's a great Waterboys song called The Return of That, which has the lines, at sea in a ship in a thunderstorm, the very night that Christ was born, the sailors heard from overhead a mighty voice cry, Pan is dead. So follow Christ as best you can. Pan is dead. Long live Pan. Pan says, very interesting. So anyway, I wrote this song, which sprung out of the idea that Jesus might have said, I'm the green man, right? And I, all innocently wrote it. And two really interesting things happened. I play in pubs. I do singer-songwriter stuff. And the pub I played, which happened to be in Grantchester, not the Green Man, but a pub called the Blue Ball, after I sang it the first time and they thought I was singing about the rival pub, and there was nearly a riot, I said, no, I'm not singing about the rival pub, it's those guys. But people came up to me afterwards, in the interval going like, oh, that thing about you cut me down and spring back green, is that like Easter? Is that, or the goodness in the bread? Is that like, they were getting it, these guys, right? Unchurched, but interested. Meantime, a little committee of guys from my evangelical college get to hear that I'm singing this song called The Green Man, and they're saying, okay, Guite has gone native, time for an intervention. And like, they seriously did not get any of the biblical allusions. I'm going, what? Anyway, this is the song, for what it's worth, rooted, long intro. It's got a chorus, and if you didn't feel you were committing yourself to an unforgivable heresy, you might like to join in the chorus, yeah. But anyway. My face in the foliage, you've seen that face before. Carved in the choir by your fathers in days of yore. I'm the power in the pulse, I'm the song underneath the soil. I'm the unseen king of the ditches, ragged and royal. I'm the green man, don't take my name in vain. I'm the green man, time to break my chain. If you cut me down, I'll spring back green again. I'm the roots on the stalk, I'm the tender shoots on the vine. I'm the goodness in the bread, I'm the wildness in the wine. There's power in the place where my smallest tendrils are curled, and my softest touch is the strongest thing in the world. I'm the green man, don't take my name in vain. I'm the green man, and it's time to break my chain. If you cut me down, I'll spring back green again. I'm the grass at your feet, leaves that shade your head. Be your bower of love, I'll be your green grass bed. I'm in the finest flower, I'm the power in the wickedest weed. And I plow the furrow with pleasure and plant my seed. 'Cause I'm the green man, I make love with the rain. I'm the green man, and I feel like breaking my chain. And if you cut me down, I'll spring back green again. You can cover me in concrete, staple me down with steel. Spread your houses, your car parks over my fields. I'll still be there, keeping everything alive. And I'll spring back green, but you may not survive. I'm the green man, don't take my name in vain. I'm the green man, and it's time to break my chain. And if you cut me down, I'll spring back green again. If you cut me down, I'll spring back green again. If you cut me down, I'll spring back green again. I feel I should say a word of thank you about this guitar, which I think you've said this is your guitar, isn't it? It's Greg's guitar. Okay, well, thank you, Greg. Yeah. So I love guitars, and it's like the old joke about, two wives of guitar enthusiasts. One of them saying to the other, my husband is suffering from a terrible case of gas. She says, yeah, I know, guitar acquisition syndrome, it's terrible, I'm very pleased, to borrow a good guitar, and I'm going to play a song about a guitar in a minute. But I also, and I realize this is a little bit sad, but I have a very beautiful, I've got a couple of guitars, and one of them is an old Gibson J45, which I've had for a long time, and it's kind of work, and I just love it. It just kind of fits me in. And one day I said to the guys in the band, because I have a band as well, I said, just love this. I said, do you know, guys, I wrote a sonnet for my guitar. And they said, get a life. Yeah. But anyway, I did write a sonnet for my guitar, and so seeing as I'd like to read you the sonnet for the guitar before I play it. But now I feel slightly, is Greg here? Oh God, that's all right then. I just feel slightly embarrassed reading a sonnet to another man's guitar. You know, like also, you know, I kind of need to. I have to make it up to my guitar. Anyway, okay, so this was... Actually, I had a fabulous time. Gibsons are made in Bozeman, Montana, right? And one time, completely out of the blue, I got this email from a church in Bozeman, Montana, saying, would you like to come and do a weekend on theology of the arts for us? And like, I immediately said yes, just because it was like Gibson. So in between the different things, they took me to the Gibson workshop. Although I told them I wanted to do this, but they had completely neglected to tell the Gibson workshop that they were coming. So all these guys were beavering around doing their incredible and this like random English poet shows up. Says, oh, do you mind if I just read a poem? Yeah. But anyway, no, they were quite amused. But this is a poem called Hollows. So, I lift you lightly. You were made for me. No box of rain to give the grateful dead, but breath instead and beauty for the living. A certain shaping of the mountain air senses its gentle wood scents through your hollows. The high, dry hollows of Montana first saw you braced and fretted, resonant and ready to be sounded into song. The smallest tremor trembles through your form and turns the air to music. My full heart is poured into your forming emptiness and given back as passion for another. Your hollows hold a weight that sets me free. I lift you lightly. You were made for me. So, a bit nerdy, but there you go. Having wooed the guitar, I think I feel the guitar has to be played. But there's a great early Seamus Heaney poem, which is about a gift of a guitar, and it's just a guitar that was given as a wedding present, but in fact, the guitar had already been given as a wedding present, like back in the 19th century. But it's all very kind of prim and the way they write. So Heaney has this just last line where of the poem where he says, "The man who has it now is giving it the time of its life," you know. And I'm not a very good guitar player, but this is a song about the guitar player in my band who really is a good guitar player, or it's about the guitar. It's called Golden Top Guitar. And he plays acoustic, but he also has an old Les Paul Gold Top. He's a great player. And we just play in pubs and stuff. But I just wanted to write a song about that and about what can happen just in those exchanges and what this kind of music is about. It also quietly, though the band don't realize, contains an assertion of grace over works, you know. So we nicked the opening riff from this dodgy bar band in the Reaper Band, you know. Well, he's not so young, but he's not so old. He don't look back to some age of gold. He says, find what you're looking for right here, where you are. With your rock-bottom heart and my golden top guitar. He says if life was a test, no one would pass. I got a few years left. I'm gonna kick some ass. I'm gonna get you rocking, no matter who you are. When I hit that stage with my golden top guitar. The finish is frazzled, the paint's worn thin. It's got a few dents where the sweat poured in. We've all got a story for every single scar. Let me tell you yours with my golden top guitar. You know, there's people out there, they live like they're dead. They drag themselves around like they were made out of lead. They ought to meet the alchemist rocking their local bar, turning lead into gold with a golden top guitar. Well, he's been hurt, he's paid his dues. He sure knows how to spit out the blues. He's got wisdom in his soul, he's got whiskey in the jar. He's got a song to heal you in his golden top guitar. Well, he's nothing to look at, he's nothing to see. He ain't gonna make it on MTV. He knows too much to dream about being a star, but he can lift your heart with his golden top guitar. Well, he's not so young, but he's not so old. He don't look back to some age of gold. He says, find what you're looking for right here, where you are. With your rock-bottom heart and my golden top guitar. With your rock-bottom heart and my golden top guitar. With your rock-bottom heart and my golden top guitar. I'll tell you what, I think poetry itself is a kind of magic. I mean, I think language is effectively magical. It summons up new things and new words and new visions in your mind, and it's capable of, and obviously in the hands of God, breathed by the Holy Spirit in those Gospels that it completely transforms lives. And every word is already a poem. It's already somebody having worked something out. All the words we use are older and wiser than we are. We've been celebrating, particularly among the Inklings, Owen Barfield, who wrote a book called History in English Words and another book called Poetic Diction, in which he pointed out that words contain and keep for us whole ways of seeing the world that we might have lost, and which we can recover through the poetry of earlier times. So I think of words as magical, and even the combination of the letters of the alphabet as magical. It's extraordinary when you think of the whole range of literature. Think of just for a minute of your favorite book, right? And we're all probably thinking of quite a lot of different books. And just think, in all cases of all of those books, it only took 26 letters. It's amazing. I mean, it's some comfort if you're a writer. You basically have to sit and think, well, look, I've got the exact same basic toolkit as Shakespeare. I'm bound to strike it lucky, There's something. So this is my evocation or invocation of the kind of magic of language as I see it. It's called Spell. Summon the summoners, the 26 enchanters, spelling silence into sound. They bind and loose, they find and are not found. Recall the river tongues from Alf to Styx. Summon the summoners, the shaping shapes, the grounds of sound, the generative grammar, the signs of the mystery, inscribed arcana, runes from the root tree written in the deeps, leaves from the tail tree lifted, swift and free, shining, recombining in their dance the genesis of every utterance, pattering the pattern of the tree. Summon the summoners and let them sing. The summoners will summon everything. And that happens again and again in literature. And I sometimes say to kids, look, these words are magic, but they are magic. I mean, these poems and a few other things I wrote, right? Sitting in a little hut at the bottom of my garden, right? Not as magnificent a hut as Kirstin's got, on a piece of paper, right, with a pen, just recombining words, as a direct consequence of summoning the summoners and writing some words. in a magic of which Merlin would have been immensely proud, I have been lifted up on silver wings and flown across the Atlantic and returned like the return of the natives to the Ontario of my teenage years and brought here, and all on the wings of a few words. In the end, that's what it is. It's extraordinary, the power and the magic. And they do sort of take you all over the place. So I'm going to read you a poem just so we can vary the forms, which is in the ballad form. And I really like the sort of strong bounding forward of a ballad form. And so I'm going to give you a go. That's a slightly longer poem, but it tells a completely true story. I just wrote a long book about Coleridge's great ballad form poem, The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, and but this isn't as long as The Rime of the Ancient Mariner. You know, it's like he stoppeth one of three, you know. So one time I'm a chaplain at a Cambridge college, but I also do some lecturing in the divinity faculty and in the English faculty. And one time I ended up hosting an American poet and literary critic called Jerry Nicosia, who happens to have written, I think, a great biography of Jack Kerouac called Memory Babe. But is also a poet and kind of one of the last of the beat poets. And knowing that he was a beat poet, I thought, well, you know, apart from giving the formal lecture, I want to hear his poetry. And probably if he's a beat guy, he'll want a jazz band, you know, to be kind of newly. So I happen to know a jazz band, so I kind of set up a jazz band for him, and he was thrilled, you know. And he was very good. In fact, in our private conversations, I began to discover that one of the reasons why he'd got in touch with me in the first place was that I was beginning to write about the hidden spirituality, and particularly often the kind of Christocentric resonance in the most unexpected places and unexpected books. And he himself was beginning to see how much Kerouac's own Christian background and his mother's piety and taking his mother to confession, you know, that there was a kind of something happening there, and he wanted to bring it out, I think for personal reasons as well as critical reasons, professional reasons. And so we began to have a bit of a tentative conversation. Anyway, in the course of this thing happening at Cambridge, he foolishly said, well, man, I've really enjoyed this, and like, if you're ever in San Francisco, like, come over and we'll do a poetry reading together. That'll be cool. You know, obviously thinking this tweed button-bound English professor is never going to be in San Francisco, so it was a safe offer. But then weirdly, I found myself over in LA, in Biola, and I had some time, and I was thinking about hiring a Harley and riding up the Pacific Coast Road anyway, so I thought, well, like, you know, but in fact, I had to do the Harley the other way around, but time being such. So I wrote to him before I went to LA and said, look, you don't worry about this, you needn't respond, but I will in fact be on the west coast of America, and it would be great, you know, to do this if you still fancy it. And he said, oh yeah, no, that'd be great, and gave me the dates, and I was going to fly up from LA. And he said, I'm going to set up 3 readings first, and we're going to go to City Lights and everything. It'd be great. So I thought, well, you know, I'll have the adventure. I mean, I was a little bit wary because I wasn't quite sure how my delicately wrought neo-metaphysical 17th century sonnets were going to quite fit with his long-form, weirdly bop prosody, stream of consciousness beat poetry. But I thought, hey, you know, let's see. So I arrived in San Francisco. He said, just call me from the airport, right? So I arrived in San Francisco and called him. And he said, oh, great, I'm really glad you're here, man. Like, I'm in Marin County. All you need to do is take the Rainbow Bus. And, you know, you're talking to a poet. You never know if it's a metaphor. You know, I said, can you, like, open that Rainbow Bus thing out for me a little bit? And he goes, no, you just go outside. There's a Rainbow Bus. And there really was a Rainbow Bus. And it was, like, had rainbows all over it, you know. And anyway, I did nothing. So it was a pretty extraordinary time. And he showed me, you know, the San Francisco of the beats. And because I happen to like the Grateful Dead as well, we kind of did the kind of Jerry Garcia things too. And it was very weird. I went to Vesuvio's, where Kerouac used to drink, and before we were going to do a gig in City Lights, and I was like too excited, you know, to kind of go into City Lights. So I was sitting there, and this guy started staring at me. And he's like really looking me down. I thought, oh God, I am in trouble. And, you know, and he comes over and he says, I know who you are. And I was going, I don't think so. And then he points to a poster, and he says, you're that post-beat Brit bard. I said, what? And there was a poster of me wearing a tie-dye T-shirt with a guitar. And it said, 3 nights only, Malcolm Guite, post-beat, this is all hyphenated, post-beat Brit Bard. And I thought, wow, you know, like I know that people go to California to reinvent themselves, right? But I didn't realize they could also reinvent you. You know, anyway, we did our thing, and I eventually wrote a poem about it, which I dedicate to Jerry Nicosia. And it was a bit of fun, really, but I'll read it to you. The only other thing you need to know is, if you're a Grateful Dead fan, when the Grateful Dead had a tour bus, which was driven, bizarrely, by Neil Cassidy, who was kind of, you know, Dean Moriarty in the story. So he was a real link between. So they got this, one of those big yellow buses, you know, that used to be a school bus and painted it psychedelic. But you know the bit on the front of the bus where it tells you where it's going? They just wrote the word further. So here's my poem. It's called Cloud Hidden, San Francisco, for Jerry Nicosia. And it's one of the adventures that poetry got me into. I flew to San Francisco and took the rainbow bus, further into otherness, further into us, further into ecstasy, further into pain, further than those acid tests and all this acid rain. I climbed the stairs in city lights and tried the poet's chair. My verses formed a golden gate that shimmered in midair. My verses hung a bridge between those Dharma days and mine, suspended between heaven and earth, tense in every line. Snyder breathes the mountain air where mountains walk alone. Ferlinghetti's breathing still, though Ginsberg is long gone. His chants are still vibrating beyond his final bow. He howls a hipster's sanctus with hidden angels now. And Cassidy is everywhere. Garcia's in my head. I'm grateful just to be alive to hear the Grateful Dead. I read with Nicosia, read the faces and the streets. I beat these pavements with the man who chronicled the beats. We touch St. Peter and St. Paul, where Jack and Neil both prayed, and Dante's writing on the wall says all that can be said. Tonight, we read in Berkeley. Tomorrow, in North Beach, we'll harmonize with mermaids, still singing each to each. The skyline writes an epitaph with every vapor trail, while Jerry reads his elegies for every vet in jail. And after, in Vesuvio's, we'll drink a few for Jack, while Tom says to fare forward, and Van sings, take me back. I try to read the glimmer, the strange pearlescent light that graces San Francisco's skies and presages the night, and find myself cloud hidden where rhythms never stop, cloud hidden with the poets on the foggy mountain top. So that was a bit of fun and an adventure. I'm going to bring things to a close fairly shortly. We've got past 9, I think, already. I've been trying your patience. We'll have another song and just another couple of poems. I'd like, if I may, just to try out something completely new on you. So far, I've only been reading from poems that I've already published, but I've got a new book coming out at the end of October, which is called After Prayer. And it's partly because hopefully you pray before you do these things, but also you're kind of after prayer, you're trying to find out what prayer is. But mainly because my predecessor and role model and kind of formative companion and guide in the Commune of the Saints is George Herbert, the 17th century. He's just like another, it's extraordinary. If you've ever seen pictures of George Herbert, like he's just another long-haired, lute-playing Anglican poet priest, you know. One of these crops up every couple of hundred of years, you know, and I just figured it was my turn. But so Herbert has this fantastic poem. Maybe I should just do a cover here. Herbert's got a poem called Prayer, right? Which is just, it's extraordinary. It's not even a sentence. It's just this cascading list of beautiful images. And if you slow it down and run it past yourself again, each one of these images is prayer. It goes like prayer, the church's banquet. Or it says prayer is all of these things like the heart in pilgrimage, the soul in paraphrase. And it just finishes with the word something. It's an amazing poem, so I'll do a cover of his poem. They're astonishingly fruitful images. I don't know if you write, but as a poet, I'll tell you, you wait a long time for a really good image. You know, you can wait weeks till you finally get a real juicy one, right? And then when you finally get that image, you say, yes, I could probably squeeze 3 poems out of this one, you know? And George Herbert gets 27 absolute blinders, and he just gives them all away in one poem. There you go, make what you like of it, you know? And I've been going around doing retreats where I went like, hey, you know, you could take one of these images and develop it. Maybe even write your own poem. You know, I was always impressed by that interview with Bob Dylan around just after the time of the Cuban Missile Crisis, you know, when he did the song Hard Rain. And so the interviewer goes like, this is a really strange song. And well, like all these images seem to be started like, you know, I saw a highway of diamonds with nobody on it, you know, and I saw a young girl, she gave me a rainbow, and I saw a white man, he walked a black dog, you know. Like, where's all that coming from? And Dylan apparently said, look, I wrote that over the weekend of the Cuban Missile Crisis. And like all the rest of us, I really didn't know if there was going to be a world next week. And he said, I was a young man, I was bursting with, I had all these songs waiting to be written. I didn't know if I was going to have a life. So I figured I'd just write down as many first lines as possible. Yeah. And I feel that about this poem. So let me read you this poem by George Herbert, and then I'll just read you a couple of my kind of new things responding to it. So, and then we'll have a song and a final poem. So, the Herbert poem goes like this. Prayer, the church's banquet, angel's age, God's breath in man returning to his birth, the soul in paraphrase, heart in pilgrimage, the Christian plummet sounding heaven and earth, engine against the Almighty, sinner's tower, reversed thunder, Christ's side-piercing spear. The 6 days world, transposing in an hour. A kind of tune which all things hear and fear. Softness and peace and joy and love and bliss. Exalted manner, gladness of the best. Heaven in ordinary. Man well dressed. The Milky Way, the bird of paradise, church bells beyond the stars heard, the soul's blood, the land of spices, something understood. Isn't that an amazing poem? It's just like so good. And so this is me just picking up on those. And yeah, so this is, I think it's great that he starts this poem with the church's banquet, because it is a complete banquet that he gives you. And prayer is a banquet and a gift. So here's my riff on the very first one, the church's banquet. The church's banquet. Not some strict modicum, exact allowance, precise prescription, rigid regimen, but beauty and gratuitous abundance, capacious grace beyond comparison. Not something hasty, always snatched alone, junkets of junk food fueling our dis-ease. Not little snacklets eaten on the run, but peace and plenty, taken at our ease, not to be worked for, not another task, but love that's lavished on us, full and free, course after course of hospitality and rich wine flowing from an unstopped flask. He paid the price before we reached the inn, and all he asks of us is to begin. So that was my take on the church's banquet. Let me just, I I was very interested. I mean, I did a... Well, let me talk about the Christian plummet. Just the Christian plummet begins a set of images, engine against the almighty sinner's tower, where Herbert's saying, yeah, but it's not all sweetness and light, right? We experience real difficulty. We sink down, you know? I love the words. He's referring to the idea of the plummet, the plumb line at the end on the boat when the ship's sailing into unknown waters, and the guy at the front's lowering it down, and calling back full fathom 5 by the mark, and the steersman's hearing, and then you haul it up again, right? So that's the image. And there's a great thing about prayer, that prayer is exploring the depth. The Spirit of God sounds our depths. But there's something about putting the word Christian and plummet next to each other that I find really helpful. Plummet is not only the noun thing, but it's plummeting down, isn't it? Yeah? And I happen to be one of those people who do occasionally plummet. So I have kind of heights and depths, and I can get quite low, and I've occasionally suffered from depression in a fairly sort of debilitating way. And I've just occasionally been in the kind of company that make you feel even worse by saying, oh, you're a Christian, and you ought to be smiley and happy all the time, as though they'd never heard of the agony in the garden or the cry of dereliction from the cross, or ever read the book of Job. But people can make you feel like that, can't they, And that if you're plummeting, you must not be Christian somehow. Of course, the function of the plummet is to find out for the rest of the people on the ship how much they've got beneath the keel. And sometimes I think the plummets are also, if I can mix my metaphors, the canaries in the cage. They're kind of letting us know that something's not right, and they're feeling the stresses. So this is my take on the Christian plummet. And maybe it'll have some resonances for some of you as well. Christian plummet. Down into the icy depths you plunge, the cold, dark undertow of your depression. Even your memories of light made strange as you fall further from all comprehension. You feel as though they've thrown you overboard, your fellow Christians on the sunlit deck, a stone-cold Jonah on whom scorn is poured, a sacrifice to save them from the wreck. But someone has their hands on your long line. You sound for them the depths they sail above. One who takes Jonah as his only sign sinks lower still to hold you in his love. And though you cannot see or speak or breathe, the everlasting arms are underneath. So that was the Christian plummet. But let me do the one about the 6 days world transposing in an hour. So Herbert loved music. Like I say, he sort of played the lute, and he sang madrigals, and he really was really into music. And he transposition, as you know, in musical terms, you know what it's like when you're trying to sing a hymn and it's just been pitched wrong for you, and you can't sing it, it's just too high, well, what is this? I mean, there's a problem in England all the time, because a lot of the music books were written and set for boys' choirs, so the rest of us are sort of not doing very well here, and I mean, to be honest, we stand around and we produce a combination of groaning and squeaking, It's a pretty good summary of my Christian life sometimes, but so you can't deal with this. But if somebody happily transposes it for you into another key, you can sing it. And in one sense, you're singing all different notes, but you're actually singing the same tune. The intervals and the tempo are the same. And then there's the other transposition where something is transposed from major to minor. So what does Herbert mean when he says prayer is the 6 days world, i.e. the world that God created in 6 days, but the world you've been living in for the 6 days apart from Sunday, all that stuff, and the news and the shootings and God knows what else is happening out there, all that stuff, which is pitched at you constantly in a key that you can't handle. Now, the temptation is to come through these doors, or the doors of your church, or, close the doors of your inner chamber, and shut that out, and bathe yourself in a little bit of transcendent beauty for an hour. I understand that. But that's not what our prayer is for. We've got to take that stuff and ask God to transpose it so that we can turn it into prayer and into a song of lament or a song of imprecation or even a song of praise. And that's what prayer does. It does this amazing act of transposition. So this is my take on it. Here's a poem. 24/7 in the 6 days world, in endless cycles of unnerving news, relentlessly our restless hearts are hurled through empty cyberspace. Is there no muse to make of all that pain an elegy? Or in those waves of white noise, to discern Christ's inner cantus firmus, that deep tone that might give rise at last to harmony? We may not seal it off or drown it out, nor close our hearts down in the hour of prayer, but listening through dissonance and doubt, wait in the space between until we hear a change of key, a secret chord disclosed, a kind of tune, and all the world transposed. So it seems to me something that, I'll read the kind of tune poem now because it follows from that. So a kind of tune, a music everywhere and nowhere. Love's long, lovely undersong, a trace in time, a grace note in the air, born to us from the place where we belong on every passing breeze and in the breath of every creature, all things hear and fear. For faintly, through our fall, we too may hear the strong song of the sun that undoes death. And one day, we will hear it unimpaired, the joy of all the sorrowful, the song of all the saints who cry, how long? The hidden hope of all who have despaired. He sang it to his mother in the womb, and now it echoes from his empty tomb. So I'm going to do one more song and close with a poem. I'm going to do another song that's based on overhearing conversations. I was in this pub. I went to this pub, which used to be a nice pub, but in my absence, had been turned into an upmarket wine bar. So I just totally did not belong there. And it's just, used to sit with a nice pint of porter in the mullion snug, and now the whole thing is marble-top tables and men in business suits discussing deals. So just before I retreated in haste, I happened to hear one of these besuited men leaning forward and saying to his friend, without any trace of irony, saying, well, life is a game and money is how you keep score. Really? So I went and wrote this little ditty, which is about, actually, it's kind of riffing on C.S. Lewis in The Weight of Glory says, we're fools in the shallows. We haven't got enough desire. We're messing around with drink and sex and money, when infinite joy is on offer. We should want more, not less. So this is my response. Well, I don't mind a bargain, but you want to own the whole store. You say life is a game, you say money is how we keep score. I'm going to take my glasses off because they're going to fall off my... You say life is a game, you say money is how we keep score. So you sell your time for the highest bids. Everyone's a winner, except for your kids. You think I want less, believe me, I want more. You want the swimming pool, I want the source of the river. You want the lifestyle, I want to meet the life giver. All right then, you take the many, I'll take the one. You can add to your collection, it'll never get done. You can cry for the moon, I'm gonna try for the sun. You got numbers on your gatepost, golden letters over your door. You got notches on your bedpost, you can't remember who they're for. You remember a girl with glimmering eyes, you can't remember which of you was wearing the disguise. Think I want less, believe me, I want more. You want the surface, I want the depth behind it. You want to flirt with the truth, I want to get out there and find it. All right then, you take the many, I'll take the one. You can add to your collection till you're comfortably numb. You can cry for the moon, I'm gonna try for the sun. You want your numbers to come up in that lottery draw. You want to pretend that you'll never be helpless or poor. You want promotion, status and power. You want the rest of us to grovel and cower. You think I want less, believe me, I want more. You want the world, I want the one who made it. You want the song, I want the one who played it. All right then, you take the many, I'll take the one. You can take your collection into kingdom come. You can cry for the moon, I'm gonna try for the sun. You can cry for the moon, I'm gonna try for the sun. So last poem, another villanelle, if you want to spot the forms. This is a true confession, this poem. It's snappily titled, On Being Told My Poetry is Found in a Broken Photocopier. So this really happened. I was supposed to be giving a talk on poetry, right, illustrated with my own poems and handouts, but I didn't get the handouts done in time. So I thought, I can step into the the photocopying room, the reprographics department, and either it'll be a really simple photocopier, like in the days of my youth, where you just lift it, you just press copy, or if it's more complicated, there'll be somebody to help me. So I go in there, and this is a photocopier with like 4 or 5 different trays on this side, and another 4 or 5, and lights going on and off. It looked more like a Hindu god than a photocopier. It was extraordinary, and there was nobody there. So I put a bit of poetry in one end, I pressed the button and hoped to get lots of poetry out the other end. And it seemed to be going okay. And then there was this horrible grinding sound, and the whole thing ground to a halt completely. And these lights, and then it started, words started appearing. It said, jam in level C, open door A, turn thing B, and I couldn't cope. The bell was going for my lecture. So I pulled as much of my inadequate and crumpled handouts as I could from the other end of the way, went off, gave my talk, with the inadequate handouts. And as I was sneaking past the door, the open door of the reprographics room after my lecture, and this tall, very striking, imposing woman came out with one of my poems in her hand, right? And she looks at me, she points her finger, and she says, "Your poetry is jamming my machine." And I thought, that's a fantastic line. That's really good. It's it's even iambic pentameter. Your poetry is jamming my... So I was going, obviously I didn't say any of that. I said, I'm terribly sorry. So she showed me what we should have done, and, we knelt down beside the machine, and we got all the stuff out, and I said sorry several times, and, I was going... But as I left, I looked back, and I saw her uncrumpling one of these things and, actually starting to read the poem. So I thought, you so deserve a poem, So I wrote this poem on being told my poetry is found in a broken photocopier. I thought I'd use a villanelle because, a villanelle has repeated lines, and it's kind of like photocopying. See what I did then? No. Okay, so here it is. On being told my poetry is found in a broken. My poetry is jamming your machine. It broke the photocopier, I'm to blame, with pictures copied from a world unseen. My poem is in the works. I'm on the scene. We free my verse, and I confess my shame. My poetry is jamming your machine. Though you berate me with what might have been, you stop to read the poem just the same. And pictures copied from a world unseen subvert the icons on your mental screen and open windows with a whispered name. My poetry is jamming your machine, for chosen words can change the things they mean and set the once familiar world aflame with pictures copied from a world unseen. The mental props give way on which you lean. The world you see will never be the same. My poetry is jamming your machine with pictures copied from a world unseen. Thank you.
Malcolm, thank you from the bottom of our hearts. For those of us who were able to spend the weekend with you, and for everybody who is here tonight, if we go back to the image of the singing bowl, your reflections, your sonnets, your songs, your presence emptied our bowls and helped make a resonant sound that I think will continue throughout the rest of our time moving forward. And so deeply, I thank you. And I wish that we could give one more round of applause for
My face in the foliage, you've seen that face before. Carved in the choir by your fathers in days of yore. I'm the power in the pulse, I'm the song underneath the soil.